Hello, and welcome to the Living Kinetics Podcast. I'm your host, R.I.C.E, and today's topic, ice. Does it really help? Now, before we get into this question even more, you have to ask yourself some questions prior to this. And that, of course, is what's the actual issue? And, what's your goal? What's the end result that you're looking for? Because there's so many different topics we could explore with ice, all from medical emergency, tissue recovery, pain relief, weight loss, warm beverages. The list goes on and on. But of course, the big topic that everyone wants to talk about is injury recovery. Does ice really help with injury recovery? And if so, how much does it help with injury recovery? We've all had some kind of injury before. Whether it's a sprain or a strain, we've all felt it. And we've all gone through the gambit of advice that comes with it. So-and-so tells you to ice this. Another person tells you to heat that. Take this pill, rest, brace this, elevate this, immobilize this. The list goes on and on. Have you noticed, though, that a lot of people giving you these pieces of advice may have not gotten full restoration out of that joint? They may have not gotten full functionality restored back to them. This here needs to be addressed because a lot of the time people aren't basing these treatments off of basic physiology. They haven't taken into account the very small things or even big things that make up our body and why they're doing what they're doing. So let's get into it for a little bit. Inflammation. It's the first step in the healing process, plain and simple. Inflammation must be present for healing to take place. Of course, inflammation can also be present and can also cause damage to the body. A lot of autonomic diseases are going to deal with this. We'll save that for another topic, though, for another day. Inflammation in itself, though, is the body's natural defense against injury. So why block it? Why try to stop the thing that's going to stop injury? Of course, that's going to impede my quality of life. For many people out there, they believe that inflammation has a kind of a hypersensitive response, that our body doesn't deal well with injury and it overreacts to it. Now, of course, there are arguments for this. Say you're an individual who has a lot of dairy in their diet. You may have a lot of systemic inflammation going on. This, of course, is going to make you more hypersensitive to that response. And, of course, you may even have more lingering inflammation even when injury is not there. And really, any kind of pathology out there that increases that inflammation response to an excessive level. But again, that's talking about somebody with a pathology. That's talking about diet. That's not talking about a healthy individual who did too many reps at the gym. And too many reps at the gym with proper body mechanics. We're going to get into that in a second as well. Now, I also ask those people, do you honestly believe that over millions of years that we've been present on this planet, that our bodies haven't figured out how to regulate this inflammation? I don't necessarily agree that it hasn't. Keep in mind that our bodies are the most efficient living, breathing things on the planet. We're so incredibly adaptable to our environment and to all the different stresses we put on ourselves. In fact, think about this. We're so adaptable to stress, we will actually cause ourselves more stress just to feel like we're in balance. Incredible, isn't it? We are built to heal. We are built to survive. We are built to keep going. It is amazing just how much we can take and how much we can keep going with. But some of you might be asking, well, Raf, if we are so adaptable, if we're so good at healing, why is it that we have so many repetitive injuries? Why do we have chronic pain? Why are pharmaceuticals at an all-time high? And that's a great question. I mean, don't the high statistics of chronic pain kind of deem that our inflammatory process or injury process is flawed and that it needs to be aided in some fashion? To a degree, yes. But I'd rather ask the question for all those people in chronic pain, what factors do they have in their life that are working against their own body? Let's take, for example, the individual that wears high heels all the time. She or he can't expect to not experience low back pain. They can't not expect to experience some kind of pain going throughout their entire spine Really. I mean, somebody works at a desk for 8 hours and doesn't take any breaks. Can they honestly expect to not feel any pain after that, or to not have some kind of inflammatory process? The individual that lifts with a fault in their back. I mean, this person here is incredibly increasing their chance for injury. And if they're doing it on a daily basis and repeating it over and over again in the most faulty way possible, well, of course you're going to end up with injury. And of course you're going to end up with more inflammation. And of course you're going to end up with this mindset that inflammation is a bad thing. I'm here to tell you today, it is not. It has the name of a public menace. We've even come up with medications such as ibuprofen that completely stops the inflammatory process. Let's talk a little more about inflammation and just what the heck it is. It's not this big mystery. It really, really isn't. You've experienced it so many different times. All it is a response triggered by damage to living tissue. That's it. It's the same response that you're going to have when you have an infection, when you have a fever. It's the same exact thing. All your body wants to do is get the garbage out and get the groceries in, as my favorite doctor would say, Dr. Kelly Starrett. So, it's really not a bad thing. In fact, when you have your first stage of inflammation, what's happening there is we're actually trying to stop any infection from spreading. We're trying to stop from any damage from spreading. And of course, we're going to have cells go in and clean up any debris, any dead tissue that's there. And we're also going to have cells go in and rebuild any structure that was damaged. This doesn't sound like a bad thing. Imagine if your house were to get knocked down. Would you stop the building crew from getting to the doorstep just because there was a lot of them? No, of course you wouldn't. This is the only way that you're going to get your house back. Remember this. You can't have healing without inflammation, but you can have inflammation without healing. Now, I want to talk to you about a very important individual, Dr. Gabe Mirkin. This individual coined the term R.I.C.E, rest, ice, compression, and elevation. He coined the term in 1978, and even prior to this, the field was hooked on ice, and he really just pushed that ice into a whole new realm, and of course rest to go along with it. We'll talk about that here shortly. In his article, Why Ice Delays Recovery, yes, Dr. Gabe Mirkin, the man who coined R.I.C.E, actually is questioning ice. He talks about a summary of 22 scientific articles found almost no evidence that ice and compression hasten healing over the use of compression alone, as said in the American Journal of Sports Medicine, January 2004. In regards to compression, I find that it is very, very useful, particularly if you're using Kelly Starrett's Voodoo Floss. That's something that I really, really recommend that you look up what he's done with some of the swelling in ankles before. Healing requires inflammation, he goes on to talk about. He describes how the healing process is, again, what I just described to you. But one big factor that he talks about as well is a hormone called insulin-like growth factor, otherwise known as IGF-1. IGF-1 is the bomb diggity when it comes to damaged tissues. This is what's going to help repair those damaged tissues and make it functional. Ice delays and prevents IGF-1 from getting to the damaged site. There are studies that prove this. In the Federation of American Societies for Experimental Biology, November 2010, they did a study with two groups of mice, one in which had a very large amount of IGF-1 and the other group had almost none. What were the results? Well, you can almost guess them yourselves. IGF-1 group had a full recovery, while anybody in the non-IGF-1 group had zero recovery. Why would I ever want to stop that from getting to my injured site? In fact, I want to get it there as fast as possible. Ice will stop that from happening. The blood vessels do not open again for many hours after ice has been applied. Decreased blood flow can cause the tissue to die, and of course causing permanent nerve damage after that. That doesn't sound anything healthy. That doesn't sound like I'd want to use that with my body. In fact, quite the opposite. The effect of cryotherapy on muscle recovery and inflammation following a bout of damaging exercise is another paper here that I'd like to reference. It's posted in July 20th, 2013. They took 20 recreationally active males and they completed a 40-minute run at a negative 10% grade to induce muscle damage. 10 of the subjects were immersed in a 5 degrees Celsius ice bath for 20 minutes, and the other 10 served as controls. What were the end results? Well, in conclusion, 20 minutes of cryotherapy was ineffective in altering the strength and decrement of soreness seen after muscle-damaging exercise. All in all, the ice bath had no effect whatsoever. Really, those poor guys just got in there to freeze their nuts off. But you might be asking yourselves right now, you might be thinking to yourselves, why have I heard about so many sports teams or so many pro athletes using ice that, it seems to be a really big part of their regime. What am I missing? Well, I don't know about every sports team, but one I'd love to talk about in particular is the Suns. The Suns use a cryo chamber type of thing. Think Han Solo type style, but your head's kind of sticking out of the top. Now, this cryo chamber is like a refrigerator for people, and it acts much differently than your traditional ice bath is going to. First off, it gets down to negative 275 degrees Fahrenheit. The ice bath that you get into, of course, isn't going to get anywhere near that. So this machine isn't working with the medium of water, of course. It's using dry environment to push all this through. And again, the properties that it's going through are even different. When you're using ice or an ice bath, a lot of the times the objective for the average Joe or for even the above average bear is trying to stop circulation. They're trying to push everything away from it and keep it away from it. Well, in a machine like this, that's not their end goal whatsoever. They're not concerned about inflammation. They're concerned about oxygenating that inflammation. They know the process is going to happen, so what they do is they get the periphery to get very cold, just on the skin, very cold on the skin, and it pushes everything back to the core. All the blood gets rushed back to the core and gets reoxygenated, every little bit of it. And as it gets pushed back to the periphery, inflammation is still going to occur, but now it's like super inflammation, and it's going to occur at a level that is really outstanding, and it's going to get the results that ice, or cryotherapy, I should say, is truly looking for. Now, a machine like that is going to run you about $50,000. The average weekend warrior isn't going to have an extra $50K just lying around. Keep in mind, though, advances are being made every single day in cryotherapy, and eventually they are going to have, and I think even now, in-home units that you can do in localized areas that are going to work along the same principle. But until then, no ice packs, no rice. I still got to talk about rest. And you don't have $50K for a cryo machine. What do? Well, it's simple. R.I.C.E. or meat protocol for acute ligament strain treatment. Posted September 29th, 2010 by sports physiotherapists. MEAT is the new acronym. Not rice, but meat. And I know how silly it sounds, but hear me out here. So instead of rest, we got movement and exercise as the ME. Movement is so incredibly important to the healing process. And in fact, I'd really like to divert attention away from temperatures and place it with movement. Our ancestors, 100,000 years ago, did not use ice packs to adapt to their injuries. No, they continually moved. There was no stopping. You couldn't just stop in the middle of a hunt because your ankle was hurt. No, that's your food. That's your way of life. That's your existence. You had to keep going. Because what we should keep in mind with movement is that it heavily influences our recovery process. Let's take, for example, our lymphatic system. Lymphatics don't have a pump like your circulatory system does. It doesn't have many means of movement. In fact, the only two that I am aware of would be physical contraction due to you contracting it or an electrical pulse contracting it, and massage. So, to even get debris out of the affected area, let's say you have a swollen ankle, to even get that swelling out of there, you have to move it. That's how your body is set up. It's set up on a pressurized system, so even as pressure is going out, more pressure is going in. It's just how physics work. Let's also keep in mind that when you rest, these collagen fibers that are trying to rebuild this site are going to rest in any fashion that they want, unless there's a stressor put on the site. Now, you don't have to go and do a lot of very rigorous exercise for this. No, simple movement in the acute stage is going to align these fibers so you don't lose that functionality later on. Now, of course, exercise, while very close to being movement, of course, there's going to be more resistance placed on the tissue now. This isn't that different from how it would have been 100,000 years ago. Let's think about this. I injure myself during a hunt or during any kind of physical activity. I eventually have to start moving, and soon. So being able to put weight back on an area is something our body is meant to do. It's actually been shown throughout a lot of research that active range of motion is a far better treatment than the whole R.I.C.E complex put together. Moving on in our meat discussion here, analgesic is going to be that A. Analgesic. This is any kind of tool utilized to control acute pain. Something that you've probably heard of before is a topical analgesic, such as like Biofreeze or Tiger Balm. This here is going to affect the body in a localized area by stopping that pain signal. It's not necessarily going to inhibit the inflammatory process, though. And this is the big difference from ice to Biofreeze. Treatments. That's the T that's going to be in meat. This is going to suggest that you get some kind of treatment beyond your own movement, beyond your own exercise, beyond your own self-recovery, whether it be physical therapy, massage therapy, maybe even chiropractic or any other modality like that. Now, please keep in mind, I don't think R.I.C.E is completely useless. Rest and ice, mostly useless. Keep in mind, there have been studies out there that shown that the two of those can actually decrease the strength of an area up to 30%. That's not something that's going to increase your functionality by any means. But compression, I'm a huge fan of it. I want to remind you about Kelly Starrett's Voodoo Floss. There are a lot of amazing videos out there. If you are a massage therapist listening to this, I beg of you to go check that out. It's the #1 tool I use to keep my arms in practice. But now, onto a brighter topic. The 4-Hour Body by Tim Ferriss. This book has a chapter in it that talks about how to use ice as a weight loss mechanism. So we're changing the scope from tissue recovery to weight loss. In this lens, I love ice. Give me ice all day. In his chapter, Ice Age, Mastering Temperature to Manipulate Weight, he details a story about an individual that goes through 2 periods of weight loss. In his initial attempt, he lost 17.8 pounds of fat in 12 weeks. It's an average weekly loss of 1.47 pounds. Not bad. That's incredibly respectable. On his second attempt, he lost 28.6 pounds of fat in 6 weeks, an average weekly fat loss of 4.7 pounds. What does that mean? Well, that means there was a 61% more total fat loss in half the time. The only difference that he had in these two, it wasn't he didn't exercise more, he didn't change his diet or anything like that. It was just the use of ice. So you might be asking yourself, how does that even make sense? Well, studies have shown that you will burn 4 times as much fat with cold exposure than you will with just normal temperatures. Why does this happen? Well, for a couple of different reasons. Swimming in a cold pool, swimming in really any cold water is going to have a certain thermal load on you. Water, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, water has a 24 to 25 times bigger thermal conductivity than air does, which means that you're going to lose heat or calories 24 to 25 times faster. The effect is the same as if you were to pour hot coffee into a metal cup versus a ceramic mug. The former is going to lose heat, or again lose calories, much faster. Prime example, Mr. Michael Phelps. You realize this guy eats over 12,000 calories on a daily basis. The average person eats maybe like 3 or 4, maybe not 4, that's not so average. But 12,000, of course, is an average. You would expect him to be completely obese, but he's not. He's a swimmer. He's constantly in some kind of lower temperate water, so he's constantly burning higher calories than the average Joe would. The second part to this, there are at least two distinctive types of fat in the body: white adipose tissue, W-A-T, Watt, and brown adipose tissue, B-A-T, BAT. White fat is what you normally think of as fat. Think of a big juicy steak. That's white fat. That's the gristle. It has a single fat droplet on a cellular level with a single nucleus. Brown fat, on the other hand, is known as the fat-burning fat. It's derived from the same stem cells as muscle tissue and is composed of multiple droplets and has a much higher volume of iron-containing mitochondria. Mitochondria. They're best known for producing ATP, adenyl triphosphate, the energy chemical in the body, and oxidizing fat and muscle tissue. Brown adipose tissue will also help dissipate excessive calories as heat. These calories would otherwise be stored as white adipose tissue and end up as your beer gut or muffin top. In a nutshell, cold stimulates brown adipose tissue, which in turn burns fat and glucose as heat. In other words, it's your best friend. Sounds like fun. Where do we get started? Well, he gives you 4 different suggestions on how to get started with a regimen like this, and trust me, it will have some type of effect on your body. First one, an ice pack on the back of the neck or upper trapezius for 20 to 30 minutes, preferably in the evening. An easy slush pack that you can make for yourself that's going to really conform to the body would be to take some kind of plastic Ziploc bag, fill it up with 1 part of rubbing alcohol, 9 to 10 parts water, and throw it in the freezer. And you're going to have yourself a pro slush pack that you can use again and again. Second thing he suggests, 500 milliliters of ice water on an empty stomach immediately upon waking. This can increase your resting metabolic rate 24 to 30%. That's a really good start to your day, especially if you're going to have a nice filled protein breakfast after that to keep that metabolism really high. The third thing that he suggests, 5 to 10 minute cold showers before breakfast and/or before bed. It's hard to do in the morning, but trust me, you can truck through it. And the fourth thing that he suggests is 20-minute ice baths that induce shivering. Again, we're talking about weight loss. If we're up to injury recovery, the induction of shivering is not what we're looking for. But when it comes to weight loss, very much is what we're looking for. You're going to really boost up that metabolism, really boost all those calories that you're burning at a resting rate. So we've talked about ice. But now let's talk a little bit about heat, because I know it's on everybody's mind. Again, I want to move away from the temperature lens and move into a movement lens. Is heat detrimental to the body? I'm going to argue no. It's not detrimental in most cases. Even in the acute phase of an injury, I'm not going to agree that heat should not be used. Why do I say that? Well, a lot of people argue that placing heat on an inflamed site is going to increase the inflammation. Please keep this in mind. Heat brings blood flow, yes, but it brings that blood flow because it allows the small muscles around around arteries to relax. And as this relaxes, we have a vasodilation, a loss of pressure, and of course the properties and laws of osmosis take place, and blood's going to rush there. I'm not going to tell you to place a heat pack on every injury that you get, but after the acute phase, yes, please get a heat pack on it if you're not going to do that movement. Now, this perception that I bring to the table is coming from more of an Eastern type of philosophy when you're to talk about Ayurvedic medicine or even traditional Chinese medicine. Back in those types of medicines, it was very sound to use heat. Heat was available. Ice isn't always available. Heat is in the body. It's almost a philosophical thing when you're talking in those styles of medicine. Even when you sit down to eat a meal, it's hot water. It's not having a cold beverage like you would in the West. So I really have a lot of faith in those more Eastern type of styles of medicine, not necessarily based on how long they've been around. That's not what's convincing to me, but rather the really weird studies and really weird statistics that have come up because of it. It's really easy to just kind of brush it off and say that it doesn't work until you start getting huge results. But of course, that conversation is saved for another day. I hope this episode was informative and enlightening. And please, my friends, always remember to be safe and stay safe, be awesome and stay awesome. Everybody, have a beautiful day.